gosh. Little Jake growing up. So being real, I don't remember a good amount of my childhood. I know that sounds weird for me to say because I'm 27, very young, 27, okay? Um, but I don't remember a lot of my childhood. I remember I played soccer growing up. Um, but me and my brother and sister, we bounced around a good amount with family members and even with just our own parents. But with my dad being in the hospital a lot, we went on like vacations. I had school, but I don't remember a good amount of my childhood. Maybe that's just because I got really bad long-term memory. But little Jake, yeah, he got in trouble a ton. He was labeled in a small Christian private school as a troublemaker, and yeah, that's who he believed he was. So I had a really, really tough time growing up, making friends and being just a kid who like didn't understand really what was happening in his life, with being bounced around with so many adults and not in a bad way. They're all great people, but I think the underlying thing was that I didn't really know or understand what was happening in my life at the time. And so, like I just said, like being labeled as like a troublemaker, that influenced people and how they viewed me. And when I was younger, how people viewed me was how I viewed me. And so if people labeled me as a class clown, then that's what I was gonna be, because maybe I just wanted attention. Maybe I wanted people to recognize me, notice me for who I was. Growing up, yeah, like I had never had trouble, I guess, fitting in with people, but I've never really felt a close connection growing up with kids my age. And maybe that was just because we just had different things going on in our lives. But growing up, yeah, just fit in everywhere I went. But I fit in because I was a troublemaker, because that's how people labeled me, that's how people described me. And it's like pretty much the defining thing in my life. It's kind of what makes me me. And so when I was 4 years old, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and throughout the years, was in remission, was battling it, doing really well, doing really not so great. Times where people gave him months to live, times where people said, all the cancer's gone, and then everything in between. So my dad battled cancer from 2001 until 2011, and he battled with it for 10 years. And in those 10 years, he had hip surgery because cancer ate away at his hip. He had to get a bone marrow transplant to try to eradicate, kill the cancer that was just in his blood cells. Tons of chemo, times where within like his bone marrow transplant, which I had mentioned before, my dad had, when that happens, you have to be isolated away from people for a certain amount of time. And so we went to go live with other people. We could visit my mom and dad a few times throughout the months, but my dad really needed to recover. So it was super, super important that me as a kid, like my dad was redeveloping his immune system, so it was important for us to not be around him to compromise that. So a lot of my life was surrounded, and pretty much everything was about my dad's cancer journey. But even in the middle of all of that, my mom and my dad, they were the best parents I could have ever asked for. In the middle of the pain, in the middle of the stuff that I can see a little bit of now, but I had no idea about as a kid. It's a little bit of a testament to how great a job they did of raising me, my brother, my sister, even during the journey of cancer. And my mom was the primary caretaker. My mom's still with us today. She is one of the most incredible people I know. But my dad having cancer was pretty much the story of my life. For me, it was growing up. I was like, my dad went to the hospital almost every week. And for me, when their kids at school would be like, oh, my parents were in the hospital, could you guys pray for them because it was a Christian school? I'd be like, oh yeah, my dad goes to the hospital all the time. So for me, it was something normal that happened, and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. So I thought parents going to the hospital was just something that happened. And but yeah, impacted the way that I saw the world, impacted the way that even my parents taught me to love people and treat people. And growing up, they really instilled the values of Jesus in me. And, never, even in the middle of my dad battling cancer, my mom being primary caretaker, we never missed a Wednesday for youth group or for a thing called Royal Rangers, which is like a Christian Boy Scouts group. You may have heard of it, I don't know. But growing up, going into youth group, and then Sundays, we never missed any of that stuff, no matter what. Even when my dad was in the hospital, they'd find somebody to take us to church because they knew that was so important for us, and those things that they instilled in me at that age still translate to how I live today. But so many of the formative years of my life, I just remember parents being at the hospital all the time and my dad battling cancer. So it affected everything a lot. I mean, as anybody would expect. It's kind of where our personalities kind of were developed, or maybe exposed, or I would even say it's kind of where we developed tendencies to do things in our young lives. So my relationship with my parents, I didn't understand a lot, I would say, until I got maybe like 10 or 11. I started to understand the weight of it all and kind of what everything meant. But I grew up in a house where my dad was my best friend, and we did, everything together. He taught me to play lacrosse. He's the one that got me into playing football, because he did both of those things when he was in high school. And so me and my dad were super tight through it all. But being honest, because of everything I didn't understand, like I would fight with him a lot. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like everything was perfect, and being real, a lot of the times we would fight, it was because of me, and most of the time we would. And me and my mom, of what I can remember in my early teenage years until even until present day, me and my mom have been really close. But when my brother was growing up with this stuff, my brother's super good socially, has always been really good at making friends, and he's super talented. He plays drums, played soccer, was on varsity soccer for like 5 years at our Christian school. We started as like an 8th grader. He's super insane and super talented musically. And so everything my brother did, I wanted to do. So that affected my relationship with him because I was the annoying little brother. And because of that, there's a little bit of distance created, of course, right? Like nobody wants their annoying little brother tagging around all the time. And but yeah, so everything my brother did, I wanted to do. And he was a really big father figure for me in my life because my actual father was gone a lot, or at the hospital a lot, or unavailable, or just not really feeling himself. And my little sister was the annoying little sister, but because of who she was, I love her dearly today. But she was a lot of times with my Aunt Kim and her girls. She had 4 girls and an older boy, but she was with them a lot. And so growing up, me and my sister, we weren't super close. I would say probably now and today we're super close. But when we were growing up, I looked after everything my brother did, and I tried to copy that. And with my sister, it was just like, she's just there, and she's kind of experiencing the same thing I did. But with me and my parents, it was just even trying to remember some of the conversations that we had, and I tried to just help out as much as I can, or as much as I could around the house. That was kind of my biggest thing growing up, is just trying to be helpful and doing anything I can to take a load off of them, whether that was mowing the grass or just simply taking out the trash, doing dishes, stuff like that. Just regular chores that kids have, but seeking them out and being like, hey, like, what can I do to help? Because growing up, like I said, like I wasn't super close with a lot of people until I probably hit like 12 or 13. I developed 2 of my best friends who I'm still really tight with today. So April 1st, 2008, I was 12, and my dad took my brother and I to a hockey game, which developed my strong love for the Caps. And it was April Fool's Day, and so he told us, long story short, we're going to sit in the nosebleeds, but we got there early enough to go watch the warm-ups on the ice, which you can go down and hit on the glass and maybe get a puck or an autograph from somebody. We weren't lucky enough to do that, but as we turned around to go back up the stairs, my dad was like, okay, we'll go grab snacks, whatever. We go grab like drinks and, popcorn or something like that, chicken nuggets, I don't know. I don't really remember, but he was like, all right, follow me, and we went back down to the ice. I was like, Dad, warm-ups are over. He's like, yeah, I know. Me and your Uncle Al got you guys these seats. And we were sitting on the glass. at my first ever hockey game, and that developed a strong love for hockey. And my dad, as he got more into his battle with cancer as it progressed, he was unable to go and play lacrosse with me outside as much because of his hip, and he would attend everything that he could, but one of the ways that we really bonded was watching hockey together. But that April 1st, 2008 date just sticks in my mind. Number one, because I have the ticket, but number two, because I can still vividly remember that day till this day. So yeah. So growing up, no fault of my church or my pastor or my parents, but God was religion to me. And even no fault to my kids' church pastor or my youth pastor growing up, who is a common thing nowadays, but I had like 3 or 4. And the last one who stuck with me, her name was Jessica. She was fantastic and one of my favorite people on this planet to this day. They all love me so well, but just something in my head made me think, if I do and I do not, then I am doing what I'm created to do. And I know that there's an element to that is partly true, but I was missing so much of it. I would pray to God all the time. God, would you please heal my dad? And things would go good, and so I'd continue to do good. And then things would go bad, and I'd be like, well, I might as well not even do good anymore. So let me choose opposite of what I have been doing. And what I found was, growing up, is Christianity to me was a list of rules, was a list of commandments that I should or shouldn't do, and I never understood the why behind the what growing up. And I looked at God as somebody who was almost like a vending machine. It's like, if I put in the right algorithm, or if I put in the right equation, then I will get the answer that I want. And growing up, it got to the point where I really struggled with prayer, because people would come up to me at my church and be like, man, like, we're praying for your dad, like, we're believing that we're gonna see a miracle. And people would even come up to me as a 10, 12-year-old kid, be like, man, we've had visions of your dad being healed, it's gonna be incredible. And I hated people for that, because I'd be like, I don't know where you guys are getting this stuff from. I don't know why you guys are praying, because I'm doing everything I can to make God like want me, or to make God listen to me, to make God listen to my prayers. I'm doing everything I can. And when things would go wrong, I would find myself distancing myself from God. And what it did was, it put in my brain that it's not a relationship with God, it's just a religion with God. And if I do more good, then God will do more good for me. And I got so frustrated in my young, I guess, quote unquote Christian life, when I would do good and bad would happen. My dad passed away September 25th, 2011, with a 10-year battle of cancer. And I hated God. And I ran to girls, I ran to pornography, I ran to talking in ways I shouldn't have been talking, and even treating people ways I shouldn't have been treating people as a 15-year-old kid. And I ran to those things because in my mind, I was so sick and tired of doing good. I was so sick and tired of following the rules, when the whole reason I was doing it was for my dad to get better. And it came to a point where I realized it didn't matter what I did, that my dad was still going to pass away. And when that happened, it drove me down this road where I hated God for about 2 years. I would still go to church on Wednesdays, and I would still go to church on Sundays because it was still religious to me. And I didn't pray to God, talk to God for about 4 to 5 years. So I probably turned about 18 or I guess 19 years old when I was in college, actually, because people told me, yep, we prayed for your dad, he's going to be healed. And for me, that was just like, okay, if they prayed and it didn't happen, then God's not a good God. And so my dad's journey with cancer blew up my entire world and blew up my entire picture of who God was. So I was a 17-year-old college freshman, and super funny thing, my mom and dad told me I couldn't date until I was 18. That was just the rules of the house And I was like, Mom, I'm in college now. Is it okay if I date somebody? And I was 17, and she was like, yeah, I guess it's fine. I didn't date anybody. But what led to me turning around was me falling deeper into darkness. My freshman year, the whole fall, I still had that religious idea stuck inside my head. So I went to Salisbury University, literally right down the road here from Emmanuel Church, and I church hopped from Baptist church to Wesleyan church to Assemblies of God church, which is the denomination that I came from, to non-denominational, to Methodist, to everything in between, just looking for a place to call home. And I never found it my freshman fall year until the freshman spring semester, when I joined a thing called Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and a guy named Caleb took me under his wing. I actually still keep in contact with him today. And I didn't go to his church. I just showed up to this thing on Tuesday nights, where people loved on football players, soccer players, all athletes that went to SU. And this dude wasn't an athlete, or maybe he was, but he didn't play sports for the school, is what I'm saying. And he was the one that taught me what a disciple of Jesus looked like. He taught me what it looked like to walk with Jesus, to walk a life out that wasn't religious, that was full of intentional relationship. And even when we mess up, even when people mess up in our lives, that's not the end of it. And I talk to him, I'll shoot him a message like maybe every couple months, and I'd be like, hey man, like, it's so cool. Like, just thinking about conversations that we had at Commons, which is our cafeteria at SU, or him just inviting me to even sit next to him when we were in Devil Bis 123 or 130, whatever it was at the time, because FCA started off as like a group of like 10 kids and blew up into like this organization of 50 to 75 students that would come together on Tuesday nights. But despite him taking me under his wing, people can't do it for us, right? Like, Caleb couldn't live out my Christian life for me. And so I found a church, and that was my home for 5 years, my church home for 5 years before I came to Emmanuel, or 4 years, somewhere like that. And in the middle of that, me going to church and being religious, like, I was still trying to figure out what this looked like to be a disciple of Jesus, to have a relationship with him, and to have a relationship with other people, and try to encourage others to be disciples of Jesus and walk with people in that. My sophomore year, I had a best friend who turned his life around, and he was like a big partier, a big drinker, all that stuff, and Jesus just got a hold of his life through FCA, which was awesome, and he's still one of my best friends to this day. But we went through the whole year, hung out every day, we got sick of each other, and the summer came, and people actually don't know this, and it's maybe a little bit too much information for this, but I actually got cut from the football team my sophomore year. And what ended up happening was I talked to my coach, like, hey man, I still would love to play. He was like, hey, like, we want you here. They had to cut me like temporarily. But he's like, if you stay, you work out, we see your progress, all that stuff. Long story short, I ended up staying to try to make the football team again, which I did end up doing because I played 4 years at SU. But because I stayed, me and my friend stayed, what ended up happening is my buddy ended up kind of backsliding. Still one of my best friends to this day, and I love him dearly. But what that ended up doing is it drove me into a place of loneliness. And I was like, man, God, I thought I was figuring this stuff out. I thought I was gonna be okay. Like, I thought everything was gonna be good now because I'm now a disciple. I'm now have a relationship with you. And what it did was it drove me into trying to find fulfillment through people, through relationship, just maybe even through friendship. And it brought me to this point where there's one night where I just messed up big time. And I was laying in bed that night, and I was like, God, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want from my life? Like, what do you want from me? And I felt at that moment, my sophomore year summer going into my junior year, I felt the lowest I ever had, even lower than when I lost my dad, because I didn't have anybody around me. I was isolated, I was alone. And that's when God got a hold of my life. Not in that moment, but the next day I worked at this storage facility, and I could watch YouTube videos there all day. So I started watching this guy named Stephen Furtick back in 2014, maybe 2015. And the sermon was called, Why Does Our Faith Fail? Long story short, part of the sermon that really struck out to me or stuck out to me was we don't ask God, or as a guy, I'm so bad with signs and I'm so bad with signals, I can't pick up anything unless maybe I'm like really, really looking for it. But he was like, God, we always ask God for a sign. But like, what if we started to ask God to just tell us what to do? God, would you just make it extremely clear to me? Would you just tell me? And I was like, okay, I'll pray that prayer tonight. I prayed that prayer on Friday night, Saturday night. Walked into my home church on Sunday, and that Sunday was Father's Day, and I hate Father's Day. Even to this day, I don't really enjoy Father's Day, just being completely real with you. And this was maybe 4 or 5 years after my dad has passed. Father's Day still sucked for me. And I remember walking in really sad. I was like, I still got to go to church on Sunday. Still got to show up on Wednesday. Still got to do all this stuff. And the pastor, he's like, hey man, he knew the story. He's one of the greatest pieces of my life in that period of my life in Salisbury. He said, you want to go to Chili's with us after church? And I was like, heck yeah, free food, count me in. And we were talking at dinner, and he just saw, just brokenness in my eyes probably. And I think he probably knew what was going on in my heart, especially that day. And he's like, hey man, you ever thought about like leading the youth at our church? And at this time, our church was like 40, 50 people, and we had like 6 kids that were gonna be middle school, high school, even like kids church age. And I was like, immediately, I knew that what I was praying for was answered right then. And I know that doesn't happen all the time, but for me it did. And I was like, okay. I was like, yeah. I was like, without even hesitation, I was like, yeah, I would love to. And then for two years after that, I led maybe three or 4 like youth groups on a Sunday, while simultaneously working this organization in Salisbury, which is a phenomenal, incredible organization led by Dave Etling called Young Life. But I was just doing exactly what God had made clear to me, what he told me to do, which I believe came through Pastor John at that moment, where he said, would you want to work with youth or the students in our church? And I was like, all right, God, if that's what you want me to do, I'm going to do it. And so for 2 years, I led about 4 or 5 Sunday services, and then volunteered my time with Young Life in the area at Parkside High School. It brought me one of my best friends, Mark Aarons, who I met at Salisbury my freshman year. And I joined Young Life my sophomore year of college and learned what it meant to disciple someone who is younger than you, to love someone who's younger than you, to buy a cookout for someone that is younger than you, spend a lot of time with people who needed something that I needed when I was in high school. One of my favorite things about that organization is it sets up people, they're called Young Life leaders, who go into a school, who go to the cafeteria and stand there awkwardly, like just trying to make a relationship with a student. And then once you make a relationship with the student, you're in. Like you can go to the games, you can connect with their friend groups and all that stuff. But Young Life was one of the most impactful things for me in my life because number one, it taught me how to be bold and brave and to embrace the change and embrace even seasons in ministry. But yeah, it taught me so much, especially about high school students, and how often things change so quickly in their lives, but also how desperately they just want and need somebody in their corner. And that was one of the things that really grew my heart for students, and even more so students in Salisbury. If you guys know, we have 3 high schools within like almost like 2.5 miles of each other, which is like insane. Really not ordinary for like the rest of Maryland, let alone probably the country. Where I grew up, the closest high school to my high school was probably 25 minutes away. And here it's about 2 minutes away from each other. But Young Life taught me how to organize, taught me how to lead, taught me how to follow, taught me how to listen. It really taught me how to do ministry. And when I eventually came to Emmanuel, everything that's here right now pretty much came from my time and experience in Young Life. Like without Young Life, I don't really think I would know how to be a youth pastor. I was so excited to come and be a youth pastor, number one, but to be a youth pastor at a church this size was so exciting to me because I was like, man, like the opportunities are endless. Like the kids are gonna be all about it. It's gonna be the best experience ever. Like I'm never ever going to experience hardship. It's going to be just smooth sailing all the way. And boy, was I wrong. I remember the first few years I was working here. I started in 2018, so I had that entire summer. I went to camp. It was awesome. I got to make a ton of relationship with students. And then I launched One Youth in September of 2018 because before we separated into middle school, high school, and God really laid it on my heart to make it one. Therefore, that's kind of where our name comes from, is we're one youth. We're not separate. The first year was like really awesome, impactful. I got engaged in early 2019, so about 7-8 months into youth ministry. Got engaged and then started planning a wedding. My wife Carly and I, we bought a house in 2019. She moved in July. I moved in after we got married in November. And so everything was going well. You know, we had a flourishing youth ministry, and then started to develop a lot of questions. We went to the largest Wesleyan church in America in February or so. Yeah, February, because we missed the Super Bowl. I remember that. We missed the Super Bowl to go to 12 Stone in February 2020. And we went there, and I came back, honestly, with more questions than I had answers. And I was frustrated coming back. And every year for One Youth, what we do is we develop a word that kind of outlines, dictates our year. And I remember for the year that led into COVID, our word for the year was pretty much being together. And I remember when COVID hit in 2020, I'm 2 years into this job, and there's a global pandemic happening. And I'm like, what in the world is happening? But through that, God actually allowed us to carry on our small groups, which was districts. And then through the summer, he actually changed it to a thing we call Real Life Now, which we talk about life and we get real. Every Thursday night, we don't miss Thursdays ever. And we definitely don't miss Sundays at One Youth. Kind of gives you guys a little bit of insight into how I grew up. I still don't miss today. Even if I'm not physically here, I have somebody covering for me. We don't cancel youth stuff. But through COVID, what ended up happening is God had developed this culture of students who just wanted to be close, who wanted to chase after God together. And it ended up actually developing one of the strongest student classes for sure that I've ever had in my time here at Emmanuel, which eventually graduated 26 seniors out of it, which was absolutely incredible. Because a lot of times in youth ministry, students kind of flame out by the time they get to junior year, which is a problem I don't have an answer to. But for some reason, God had those students in COVID get so close, and they really carried One Youth on their back for a couple more years after that. But the first couple years of my time here, interesting, not what I expected, but saw God move so much in that time. Something that's been like super heavy on my mind recently is one of my favorite things to do. Maybe it's weird, maybe it's not. I don't think it's weird. But I love reading the Old Testament. I spend a lot more time in the Old Testament than I do the New Testament. And part of the reason I do that, not because I'm holy or I'm a cool Christian or I'm an edgy Christian, but because I love learning about the character of God in the Old Testament before Jesus came. And now Jesus is simply the greatest thing that has ever happened to us. That's why we call ourselves Christians and we're Christ followers. But finding out about the character of God teaches me so much about my life today. And the reason why it does is because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. You hear that, but until you understand and look at who the God of yesterday was, you don't understand who the God of today is and who the God of tomorrow will be. And in my life, what has happened is, just like all of us, we all have seasons that we go through. We all have stages. We have times where we feel really, really on fire for God, and we have times where we feel really, really distant from God. And what the character of God has taught me is that it doesn't matter about your feelings. It doesn't matter. Not saying that God doesn't care, not saying that if things are bad that you shouldn't go help or seek help. I'm not saying any of that. But what it's taught me is that in every season there will be lows and there will be highs and there will be everything in between, which seems like common sense, right? But one of the cool things when I look back, and this has been like a really cool like kind of reflection for me, because some of the stuff I haven't talked about, 15, 20 years, which makes me sound old. I guess I am old. But I look back and I see the season in my life when my dad passed. And one of the coolest things that's one of my students has ever said to me, and where they have impacted me so deeply, her name is Bella Nastasi. And she said, I wouldn't choose what happened to me, but I wouldn't change it either. And it stuck with me. At that time, she was a 12-year-old girl. And at that time, she was crying because the old youth pastor was no longer going to be in charge, and she grew to have a good relationship with me. But to have a 12-year-old girl speak that life into you, it made me reflect even more, because as I grew in my time as youth pastor, I got to look back at my time in Young Life and say, I wouldn't choose the times where we had 2 students show up for club, which is just our service for Young Life. But I wouldn't change it, because it taught me to be thankful when 2 students showed up. And it taught me to be grateful today at one youth where maybe 2 students show up. Because that's 2 souls who are looking for answers, who are looking for Jesus, who are looking for community. It says maybe I wouldn't choose it back then, but I wouldn't change it now. And then it taught me, even as I'm sitting here as a 27-year-old youth pastor, to look back at the beginning of my time here at youth ministry, where I was a single guy. Yeah, single. I was dating my now wife. But where I had so much time to go to games, where I had so much time to go and invest in students and to spend time at games, or even coach at Parkside High School. Like, I had so much time to do that. And to be grateful for those seasons, because I wouldn't choose some of the situations and the conversations that I had to have, because I was a learning youth pastor back then, but I wouldn't change it. And then it makes me fast forward to the middle of COVID, where maybe I didn't hit on this, but one of my leaders stabbed me in the back so much, where it made me contemplate quitting ministry. And I move forward now, and I look back, and I'm like, man, I would never ever choose that, because it was an awful, awful thing. But I wouldn't change it now, because it has made me into who God has created me to be. And I'm sitting here as this 27-year-old old guy, trying to connect with 6th through 12th grade students who I love dearly. And thinking back over my 5 years here at Emmanuel, and thinking, man, some of that stuff I wouldn't choose, but I know for a fact I wouldn't change it. Everything that has happened, God has used, because that's what God's character is. He's the same yesterday, He's the same today, He's the same tomorrow. I wouldn't choose that my dad passed, but I don't think I would change it, because I don't think I could feel things as deeply as I do today. I don't think I could love people as much as I do today. I don't think I could empathize as much as I do today, because God's plan is sovereign, and He has ordered my steps, and I'm okay with whatever He has for me, because what He did for Abraham, Moses, David, Samuel, Jesus, Paul, Peter, James, John, the disciples, if that's good enough for them, then it's good enough for Jake too. My whole life, I think maybe I've just understood God to be like one thing. And I think throughout my whole life, my picture of God has changed and shifted. So, how would I describe my story? Part of me wants to keep saying like revelation. Like revelation has revealed the truth. And I feel like so much of my life, I've never known what the real truth was until kind of God gets in the middle of it. So maybe I'd say that, revealed truth. As a brother, I'm protective. So that's the same thing with my students, and my relationship with Christ, as I get super, super protective of people. Maybe that's just like as a sibling and as a whole, because guess what? I can make fun of my brother, I can make fun of my sister, and this is like any really good sibling, right? But if somebody else makes fun of them, I'm gonna beat them up, okay? Now, we're not allowed to beat people up here at Emmanuel, and we don't encourage that, we don't endorse that. But I do get protective over my students. As a son, To my mother and my past father, what I've learned is honor, and honoring those above me in leadership, honoring people who are beside me and walking out this thing on staff, and then honoring those who I'm leading. Like it's so important to do all three, because even if I miss one, then I'm stuck in pride somewhere. And then learning as a husband, I have learned how to be maybe complete is the best way I can explain it. My wife can call out things in me that are broken, and maybe accountability is a really good word for that. And she can call out the things in me that are great, and she can call out the things in me that are lacking. And in each and every one of those things, what I find is that that's also what God is doing through her, and what God wants to build in me is those things that she's trying to speak over me or trying to speak out of me. And then I would say, as a brand new father, my baby girl, she's 7 months, I have learned what it truly means to be selfless. I think I've shared this before, but I feel like I've been selfish my whole life. I don't even know what I did with all the time I had before. Now I'm just, changing diapers and feeding food and playing with Fisher Price toys. So, yeah, for each of those things, they've definitely each made me a better follower of Jesus, or at least given me an idea of how to be a better follower of Jesus. Isaiah 40:31, and this is the PJV. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a Pastor Jake version. But it's talking about even youth grow tired and weary. But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. That was one of my dad's actually favorite Bible verses. And for so long, I was like, yeah, that's my Bible verse too, when my dad passed, because that made me feel connected to him. But it didn't really resonate until I really got my job in ministry, because I realized that when I'm not doing good and when I'm running on empty, it's because I'm filling myself and I'm waiting in the wrong places with the wrong things, wrong people, just wrong things. And that verse holds me accountable to what I say that I'm going to do in my life, which is to love people, to try to help make heaven crowded, not by anything I do, but what the Holy Spirit wants to do through me. And the only way I can help people is if I'm waiting in the presence of the Lord, waiting for His direction, just leaning back in the arms of the Father, like simply just being in His presence. Because if I don't do that, then I'm just Jake. And I've been just Jake before, and that's not anything that anybody would want, except for God, because He wants to use it in a way that brings Him glory. Because anything I do, everything I do, it's not me. Anything that's good, at least, it's the Holy Spirit at work in me. Something I love Pastor Mark say, talk about people that come to this church, is like every quote unquote number has a name, every name has a story, and every story has a soul. Every soul goes somewhere. Your story can be so powerful that it can impact a soul. God didn't just give you a story just to keep to yourself. He did it because you've come through the other side, battered and beaten, but you've come through, and other people need to see that. Some people even think that it's not important. Just because nothing quote unquote has gone crazy in your life doesn't mean that there's no testimony. In fact, that's a testimony in and of itself. It's God's provision and protection over your life. But your story is too important not to tell. My name is Jake Antizana, and this is my story.